You were maybe 7 or 8 years old when you first felt it. Not in a crisis, just a regular afternoon. Playground, classroom, living room, doesn't matter. Something flickered, a feeling you couldn't name, pointed at something you didn't have a word for. And then it passed, and you filed it somewhere without a label, and kept going. It wasn't fear. It was more like looking at a map and noticing your street isn't on it. Nobody around you was talking about it. The word for what you were feeling didn't exist in your house, your school, anything on TV. Or when it did, it came with a laugh track. So you learned, the way kids learn things before they have language for them, that this part of you was something you kept to yourself. This is about what that cost. Here's the thing about growing up gay in the 70s and 80s that nobody fully captures when they talk about it. The hardest part wasn't the hostility, not for most kids. Most gay kids weren't being openly targeted every day. The hardest part was the silence. The total, complete, unbroken silence around the thing you were. There was no framework, no language. No adult sat you down and said, "Hey, some people feel this way, and here's what that means, and here's the word for it." That conversation simply didn't exist. Not in most homes, not in most schools, and definitely not on television, unless you count a punchline as a conversation. So you had a feeling, and the feeling had no container. And here's what silence teaches a child. Not loudly, not in one moment, but slowly, the way water shapes stone. It teaches them that the thing they're feeling is too strange to be spoken about, too outside the edges of normal life to have a name. You absorb the lesson, not because anyone delivers it, but because the absence of any other message is itself a message. Nobody talked about it, which meant it wasn't the kind of thing people talked about, which meant it was the kind of thing you kept quiet. Think about the cultural air you were breathing. The movies, the shows, the music, all of it was running one story over and over, and you weren't in it. John Hughes understood something about being 17 and invisible, about being a kid whose interior life was bigger and more complicated than anyone around them could see. You watched those films, and something in them registered, even if you couldn't have said exactly why. The feeling of being the one who doesn't quite fit the frame, the one who has to translate themselves for every room they walk into. You were doing that translation constantly. You just didn't have a word for it yet. And the effort of it, that's the part that gets lost. Not the big dramatic moments, but the low-level daily background effort of watching yourself, editing yourself, running a quiet internal check before you said anything, moved any particular way, reacted to anything. Is this normal? Does this give anything away? Are they looking? You were 8 years old, and you were already monitoring yourself like it was a full-time job. And nobody knew. Because you were good at it. Kids who have to hide get good at hiding. That's not a flaw. That's adaptation. But it costs something. Energy spent on watching yourself is energy not spent on just being yourself. And you deserve to just be yourself, even then. Especially then. At some point, and you probably remember roughly when, even if you can't pin the exact moment, you figured out the shape of what you needed to become in public. Not a decision, exactly. More like a mold that formed around you slowly, and you adjusted your shape to fit it. You watched the other kids. You cataloged what was expected, what boys were supposed to find funny, what they were supposed to want, how they were supposed to talk about girls. And you matched it, or you came close enough that nobody looked too hard. Some of you were better at it than others. Some of you could disappear into the performance so completely that even you started to lose track of where the performance ended. And you were 8 years old when you started. Think about that for a second. 8 years old, and already running 2 versions of yourself simultaneously. The one that existed inside, and the one that went to school. Now I need you to picture something specific. It's sometime in the mid-80s. You're 11, maybe 12. It's an evening like any other. Dinner's been eaten, the dishes are done or not done, and the television is on in the living room the way it always is. And the news is talking about something. You don't catch every word. You're not fully paying attention. You're doing what kids do, half present, part of you somewhere else entirely. But you catch enough. A word, a tone, the particular way an anchor's face arranges itself when the story is about something the world has decided to be afraid of. And you start to listen more carefully, because something in what they're saying has snagged something in you. The disease has a name by now, and it has an association. The news isn't subtle about it. The adults in the room aren't subtle about it. The connection being drawn between the sickness and the kind of person who gets it lands in the room like a fact, like weather, like something everyone already understood and was simply now confirming out loud. You sit there. You don't move. You don't say anything. There's nothing to say, and no one to say it to. You just sit there with the television light on your face, absorbing what you're being told about people like you. Not that anyone in that room knew you were one of them. That was the whole point. You'd been very careful. You were always very careful. But here, in the privacy of your own chest, in the part of you that nobody had access to, you heard the message clearly. The thing that lives inside you, that unnamed, unlanguaged, carefully hidden thing. The world has decided it is dangerous. Not just different. Not just wrong. Dangerous. The kind of thing other people catch. The kind of thing that kills. You were 12 years old, and you sat with that alone. You couldn't tell your parents. You couldn't tell your friends. You couldn't tell anyone at school. There was no helpline number at the bottom of the screen. There was no adult in your life who had signaled, even once, that this was something you could bring to them. So you held it. You added it to everything else you were already holding. And you got up the next morning and went to school and ran the performance and came home and did it again. The word gay became a weapon that year, if it hadn't already. Not always aimed at you specifically, sometimes just thrown into the air. A shorthand for weak, for wrong, for whatever someone wanted to dismiss. And every single time you heard it used that way, it landed on you, even when nobody knew it was landing on you. That's not a small thing. That's years of being hit by something nobody could see you getting hit by. Here's what nobody said to you then, so I'll say it now. That was an enormous thing to carry. For a child. Alone. Without a single person who knew the full weight of it. You deserved better than that. Not in a complicated philosophical way. In the most simple and basic way. You were a kid, and you deserved to be seen. After a while, the weight becomes normal. That's the thing about carrying something heavy for a long time. You stop noticing how heavy it is because your body adjusts to the load. You recalibrate your idea of what ordinary feels like, and the performance becomes so practiced, so automatic, that you barely feel yourself doing it anymore. But your nervous system kept the count, even when you didn't. Every laugh at a joke you didn't find funny. Every conversation you steered away from the edge. Every time you liked someone and had nowhere to put it. Your body was keeping a running tally of what it cost to move through the world the way you had to move through it. You just didn't get the bill until later. But here's what I also know. Not everyone was alone the whole time. Some of you had a person, not necessarily someone who knew everything. Most of the time, not even close. But someone who, in some small way, cracked the wall. Maybe it was a teacher who didn't laugh at the joke when everyone else did. Just didn't laugh. Kept their face neutral and moved on. And in that neutrality, you caught something. A signal so faint you might have imagined it, but you didn't imagine it. Maybe it was a friend who handed you a book without making a thing of it, or a cousin who said something offhand that suggested they understood more than they were letting on. Maybe it was someone who looked at you just a beat too long after something cruel was said, not in a bad way, in a way that meant, I see what just happened. I see you. Those moments were so small, and they were everything. Research on this is actually pretty clear. When LGBTQ kids have even one person, one parent, one teacher, one friend who signals acceptance, just one, the outcomes shift dramatically. Not because one person fixes everything, but because one person interrupts the story the kid has been telling themselves. The story that says, if anyone really knew me, they would leave. One person makes a crack in that. And some of you, years later, maybe in your 20s, maybe even later, found something else. Those of you who remember the specific sound of a dial-up modem connecting, the particular screech and hiss of it, know what I mean when I say, there was a moment when you typed something into a search bar at 11 o'clock at night that you had never said out loud to another human being. And the internet, slow and ugly and barely functional as it was, showed you something. Other people who felt what you felt. Other people who had lived something like what you lived. Other people who had names for what you were carrying. For a lot of Gen X kids, that was the first time. The first time the map had their street on it. And whatever you felt in that moment, relief, grief, something that didn't have a word either, it mattered. It was real. And it was a long time coming. The kid you were deserved more than they got, not as a statement of bitterness, not as an indictment of anyone in particular, just as a plain, simple truth that maybe hasn't been said to you clearly enough. You were growing up and hiding at the same time, running a performance for everyone around you while carrying something inside that had no name, no community, no map. You were doing double the work of just being a kid, and you were doing it invisibly, and you were doing it alone. That wasn't nothing. That was a lot. That was, honestly, an extraordinary amount. And the things you built in the middle of all that, the ability to read a room, the empathy that comes from knowing what it feels like to be on the outside looking in, the resilience that isn't the motivational poster kind, but the real kind, the kind forged in years of just continuing to show up. Those are yours. Built by you, in conditions that weren't fair. Go back to that kid for a second. The one on the playground, or in the classroom, or on the couch with the television on. The one holding something with no name yet. They didn't know yet that there were other people like them. They didn't know yet that the thing they were carrying would eventually have language, would eventually have community, would eventually have a world, imperfect and still unfinished, but real, that had room for them in it. They didn't know any of that yet, but they kept going anyway. And you're here,